This happened when I was living alone in a small rental house in Oklahoma. The place was cheap, which was the main reason I took it. It was a small, one-story house on the edge of town, with only a few houses nearby and a lot of open land behind it. During the day, it felt normal enough. But at night, the area got extremely quiet. Too quiet. The first time it happened was about 2 weeks after I moved in. It was around 11:30 p.m. I had just finished watching a movie and was about to go to bed when I heard a knock on my front door. Just one knock. Knock. Not loud, but clear. I assumed it was probably a neighbor. Maybe someone needed help with something, or maybe someone had the wrong house. So I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. The porch light was on, and I could clearly see the empty front porch. At first I thought whoever knocked had already walked away, but something felt strange. The driveway was empty, there were no cars, and the road outside my house was completely quiet. I opened the door and looked around. Nothing. No one standing nearby, no footsteps, no car driving away. Just the quiet road and the dark field across the street. I shrugged it off and closed the door, figuring maybe some kids were messing around and ran off after knocking. But the next night, it happened again. This time it was later. 12:17 a.m. I was already in bed when I heard it. Knock, knock. 2 slow knocks. I sat up immediately. My bedroom was down the hallway, so I had to walk through the living room to get to the front door. As I stepped into the hallway, the knocking stopped. The house was completely silent again. I looked through the peephole. Again, no one. I opened the door quickly this time, expecting to maybe catch someone running away. But the street was empty. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees nearby. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no footsteps on the porch. My porch was wooden. If someone had been standing there knocking, I would have heard them walking away. But I didn't hear anything. That was the moment the situation started to feel wrong. Still, I convinced myself it was probably just someone messing with me, but then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Every single night, around the same time. Always between midnight and 1 a.m., and always the same pattern. Knock, knock, then silence. Yet every time I checked the door, no one was there. After about a week of this happening, I stopped opening the door. Instead, I would just look through the peephole, and every single time, the porch was empty. Eventually, I started wondering if someone was trying to scare me, or maybe someone was hiding somewhere near the porch where I couldn't see them. So one night, I decided to try something. Instead of turning the porch light on like usual, I left it off. The house was completely dark from the outside. That way, if someone came to knock on the door, they wouldn't know if I was awake or not. That night I sat in the living room with all the lights off, just waiting. The clock slowly moved toward midnight. 12:05, 12:12, 12:18. The entire house was silent. Then finally, right on schedule, knock, knock, on 2 slow knocks. But this time, I was already standing near the door, and when I looked through the peephole, I finally saw him. A man, standing very still on my front porch. But the strange part wasn't that someone was there. The strange part was what he was doing. Because the man wasn't facing the door. He was standing with his back turned toward it, like he was waiting for me to open it. For a moment, I just stood there, staring through the peephole. The man on the porch wasn't moving. He was standing perfectly still with his back toward the door, facing the street. The porch light was still off, but the dim light from the street lamp down the road was just enough for me to see his outline. He looked tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. But what made it unsettling was how completely still he was, like he had been standing there for a long time. I waited a few seconds, then another. The man didn't move, didn't knock again, didn't turn around. He just stood there. My heart was beating faster now because something about the whole situation felt wrong. If someone knocks on a door, they usually face the door. But this guy wasn't even looking at the house. Yeah, he was looking out toward the empty road, almost like he was watching for something, or someone. I slowly leaned closer to the peephole, trying to see his face from the side. That's when the man suddenly moved. Just a small movement. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening. And then, very slowly, he started turning around. I stepped back from the door immediately. My heart was racing now. I hadn't made any noise, but somehow it felt like he knew I was standing there. A second later, I heard another knock. This time it was only one knock. Knock. And then his voice came through the door. Low. Calm. Open the door. I froze. Up until that moment, whoever it was had never said anything before. He had only knocked. Now he knew I was there. I didn't answer. I just stood quietly in the dark living room. A few seconds passed. Then the man spoke again. You've been watching me through the peephole. My stomach dropped. There was no way he should have known that. The house was completely dark. I hadn't made a sound. But somehow he knew. I slowly moved away from the door and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. Part of me wanted to call the police right away, but I didn't know what I would even tell them. Some guy knocking on my door? That didn't seem like enough. Then I heard something else. The sound of slow footsteps on the porch. But instead of walking away, the footsteps moved closer to the door. Then they stopped, right outside it. I could see a faint shadow under the bottom crack of the door. The man was standing directly against it now. Then I heard him speak again. But this time his voice sounded different, almost like he was whispering. You shouldn't have looked. That sentence sent a cold chill down my spine. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely scared. The house suddenly felt way too quiet, way too empty. Then I heard something that made the situation even worse. The man outside started knocking again. But this time, he wasn't knocking on the door. He was knocking on the window beside the door. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. And he kept doing it, like he was trying to make sure I knew he wasn't leaving. The knocking on the window continued. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, calm. Like the man outside had all the time in the world. I stood there in the dark living room holding my phone, barely breathing. Every instinct in my body was telling me not to make a sound. The knocking suddenly stopped. For a few seconds, everything was completely silent again. Then I heard the sound of his footsteps moving across the porch. But this time, they didn't move toward the steps, like someone leaving. They moved to the side of the house. My stomach dropped immediately, because my living room window was on that side. I slowly turned my head toward the window. The curtains were closed, but they were thin enough that if someone stood outside, I might be able to see their shadow. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the shadow appeared. A tall shape moving slowly past the window. The man was walking along the side of my house, and he was walking slowly, like he was checking every window. My heart was racing now. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed 911. While the phone was ringing, I kept my eyes locked on the curtain. The shadow stopped, right in front of the living room window. Then I heard his voice again, but this time it sounded different. It sounded amused. You're calling someone. The 911 operator answered at that exact moment. I quickly whispered that someone was outside my house and wouldn't leave. While I was explaining what was happening, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The man outside laughed, quietly. Then he said something I will never forget. It's like you finally got scared. The operator told me to stay inside and that officers were on their way. But the man outside didn't seem worried at all. Instead, his shadow moved again along the window. Then the footsteps started moving back toward the front porch. I stayed completely still. Seconds passed. Then the footsteps stopped again, right outside the front door. I expected more knocking, but instead, there was silence. Long silence. Almost a full minute passed. The operator stayed on the phone with me while I waited. Then suddenly, the sound of a car engine starting came from outside. I rushed to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. A dark car was parked across the street in the shadows. The man was getting into the driver's seat. So within seconds, the car turned on its headlights and slowly drove down the road, disappearing into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the police arrived. They checked around the house and searched the area, but the car was already gone. One of the officers asked me something that made the entire situation even creepier. He asked if the man had been knocking multiple nights. When I said yes, the officer sighed and nodded. Apparently, a few people in nearby towns had reported the same thing over the past couple of months. A man who would knock on doors late at night after night. But he would never try to break in. He would only knock and watch, almost like he was waiting for someone to finally make a mistake and open the door. I ended up moving out of that house about 2 weeks later. But every once in a while, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still remember those slow knocks and the way he said those words through the door. You shouldn't have looked.